What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pit Limiter Podcast. It is episode number 12. I'm your host, Zach Buchanan. Joining me, as always, John Poole for JP3. What's up, buddy?
Not too much, Zach. What's up?
Oh, I did another kart race this past weekend, and I didn't end up in a cornfield, so I think it's a good weekend.
Yeah, that is a pretty good weekend.
Yeah. So, this past week in motorsports has been, I'd say it's been a little stale, honestly, but we've still got a lot to talk about. And it starts with Stop and Go. John, what do you got for us?
So, IMSA and the WeatherTech Sports Car Series visited the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. Roger Penske's number 6 DPI won overall, the 52 LMP2 won in its class, the 912 in GTLM won, and the 14 Lexus Vassar Solomon car won in GTD for their first ever win.
Awesome. So NASCAR was at Dover. They had a triple header with trucks on Friday, Xfinity Saturday, and Cup was supposed to run on Sunday afternoon, postponed to Monday due to rain. Johnny Sauter took home the victory in trucks. Christopher Bell took home the victory in the Xfinity Series race, and Martin Truex Jr. put on a clinic, took home the victory in the Monster Energy Cup race.
So, more sports car news. The 6 Hours of Spa was this weekend. The race was crazy. They woke up in the middle of May in Belgium. There was snow on the ground. The race started out clear and dry, but as the race went on, craziness ensued, following hail, freezing rain, and snow, for that matter. But the competitors made it through just fine. The number 8 Toyota, driven by Fernando Alonso, Kazuki Nakajima and Sebastian Buemi won overall. The number 7 had issues during the race, fell to 6th, almost guaranteeing the 8 car the WIC championship for the super season. The 31 Dragon Speed LMP2 won its class. The 97 Aston won in the Le Mans GTE Pro class, and the 77 Porsche won in its class.
So a lot of inside sources are leading us to believe that the Xfinity Series in 2020 is going to run on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course. Something that was reported more notably, I'd say, by Robin Miller. And it's something that's been a hot topic and a big rumor the last couple of weeks. And it looks like the Xfinity Series is going to race on the road course at IMS.
So back to some NASCAR news. Austin Dillon last Saturday, he had his rear deck lid confiscated by NASCAR, and the penalty was issued on Tuesday. He got an L1 penalty issued for him, which is 10 driver owner's points, and his crew chief was kicked out this week along with his race engineer for the illegal part on the deck lid.
So a little bit of F1 news. It was announced that Zandvoort is going to return to the schedule to replace Barcelona in 2020.
Some more sports car news, really heavy on the sports car news. IMSA has confirmed that they will adopt a mild hybrid solution for their DPI 2.0. This comes at the heels of the FIA and the ACO not deciding on the hypercar regulations going into 2020. And this new mild hybrid unit would be powered with a 48-volt system, and it's expected to be rolled out at Daytona in 2022.
So Christian Eckes has had a lot going on in his life lately. The ARCA Series driver actually had to sit out the Salem race due to food poisoning. He actually had an esophagus tear. He crashed out at Talladega, and after a rain-postponed race that was moved to Sunday, he took home the victory at Fairgrounds Speedway. So that's going to wrap up Stop and Go, and that's going to move us right into Tuesday trivia. John Poole, you're going to be amazed, brother.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay, so Scott Dixon is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time IndyCar drivers. I know you'd probably argue me on that, but I was interested to find out by doing some digging in terms of non-Ganassi Honda drivers, they haven't won a championship in a while. At least if we're talking IndyCar when it had multiple engine manufacturers. So, John, when is the last time that a Honda, non-Ganassi Honda, won the IndyCar championship when there was multiple engine manufacturers? I want the year and the driver and the team.
Okay, so can you give me a little insight? When did they actually go to that? Was it 2007 they went all Honda?
2006, they went all Honda.
My guess would be 2005, Dan Weldon and the number 26 Klein Tools for Andretti Autosport.
Andretti Green Racing, yeah.
Andretti Green, my apologies.
Yeah. Hit it on the head. Yeah, so Honda, since the DW12 era, which was the first year that we were introduced to Chevy coming back to IndyCar racing, had Chevy and Honda and Lotus until they pulled out, in which that was a joke. I kind of forgot they were there for a second. But the first year Chevy won it with Hunter-Reay. Honda won it with Dixon in 2013. When Dixon won in 2015, he was with Chevy, and then last year they won it. So in the DW12 era, they've won it twice. Honda has. But if you think about it, the Aero Kit era, 2015 to 2017, that was all Chevy. If you discard that, they're 2 for 4. So it's 50-50 if you're looking at each engine manufacturer is on the same aero design, which is kind of interesting to think about. A lot of parity, I'd say, in that aspect. But yeah, so 2006 to 2011, IndyCar had Honda as its engine provider. 2003 was when Toyota and Honda joined the IRL, as it was known then. They already had Chevy. They lost, I believe it was Infiniti. They had Chevy and Infiniti. They lost Infiniti after 2002. Then 2003, Chevy, Honda, and Toyota. Those were the three engine manufacturers. Honda and Toyota had a 3-year deal. And then after 2005, Chevy and Toyota pulled out of the IRL. I would assume mostly because Toyota was gearing up for its entry into the Cup Series.
No, actually, it was, I believe, their F1 team at the time.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it might have been. They might have had a team before that, but I think it was because of their F1 entry. And there wasn't really much ROI generated from their success in IndyCar, if you really look at it.
And it's interesting when you look at that because it was right around 2000, I would say, when Toyota really started picking up the pace. I think, actually, Toyota won its first kart race in 2000 because, remember, they were in kart first, and when kart had its falling out, that's when Toyota and Honda jumped over to the IRL, leaving Ford as the sole engine provider in kart.
And it technically wasn't Ford, it was Cosworth.
Well, Cosworth.
It was just the Ford branding.
Yeah. So, 2000 was the first, I think it was 2000. Yeah. It had to be 2000. 2000 was the first year that Toyota won as an engine provider in kart, and that was with JPM at Milwaukee. But that was a bad year because you got to keep in mind 1999. That's when they had their success with JPM. It was Honda and Reynard. They switched to Toyota and Lola. So yeah, that was a rough year for them.
And then JPM jumped ship to F1 with BMW and Williams.
Yeah. Looking back at it, 2000 was the first year that we saw Toyota win in kart, which is incredible to think about.
Yep.
So, Hendrick Motorsports in the Cup Series. They've the last couple years have been struggling, I'd say. And I think it's fair to say it's not just Hendrick, it's Chevy across the board. But Hendrick as a whole has not been very successful. Chase Elliott did win 3 races at the end of last year, and he's won a race this season. Jimmy Johnson also won the Clash. controversial or not, I mean, a win is a win. So Hendrick Motorsports unofficially has 2 wins this season. They finished 1-2 at Talladega. Alex Bowman got a second place finish today. They had 3 of their cars in the top 10, and all 4 of them were in the top 15. So, John, do you think Hendrick is on the upswing? Do you see them making a resurgence to how they were 10 years ago? Or do you think this is just a fluke?
So we could take this as, we could chop it up as, is it a fluke? Is it not? Really, ever since Chevrolet switched to the Camaro back last year, there's been a huge drop off from all the Chevy camp and such like that. So I'm thinking that now they've got their act together, per se. The Chevy has. Now maybe there are more deficiencies at Hendrick. I mean, we got to take into account they lost not future, but Hall of Famer Jeff Gordon. They lost arguably future Hall of Famer Dale Jr. And they lost a really solid driver in Casey Kane. Now that's not to say that Casey Kane struggled, like all Hendrick fourth cars have in the last couple of years. So they lost all that knowledge, all that talent around them, and then replaced it with, and this is nothing against the guys they replaced it with. They replaced it with Chase Elliott, which didn't really have didn't have that much race background. I mean, he had the past with his family, but not that much. Then you replaced him with Bowman, who didn't really get a chance to show in a ride, and William Byron, fresh rookie. So you got to think there's not as, I don't know.
Lack of experience.
Lack of experience, definitely.
Lack of leadership.
Lack of leadership, for sure. And I don't think Jimmy Johnson, at the time, was prepared to take that leadership role. Or I don't think he is now. That's nothing against Johnson. Some people are just not leaders. That's just fact.
Definitely. I mean, you could even tell that back in the later, like 2010, when Johnson and Gordon had their kind of mini rivalry going on. I think that stemmed at Talladega, where they were. I forget what happened, but I just remember they kind of got into it a little bit at Talladega that year. It kind of stemmed from an on-track incident, but Jimmy, isn't necessarily a leader, I'd say, and I think it's even worth pointing out even further. Stewart-Haas Racing got their engines from Hendrick when they were still Chevy, and they had 4 cars.
Yeah, and on top of that, they had great drivers such as Kevin Harvick, Stewart, such like that. Guys who...
Kurt Busch.
I forgot about Kurt. And
Kurt Busch, yeah. And, I mean, they had Danica,
but still.
I mean, still. At least 3 reasonable teams to have information from.
Yeah, they had a lot of information flowing between the teams and such like that. They could experiment with stuff in the engine and this and that. And I mean, they lost that customer with Stewart-Haas, and that's really hurt them on the information side. Because Ford, unlike the Chevrolet teams where you have 2 camps, Ford is just 1 camp, Toyota is just 1 camp. But Chevrolet has, Earnhardt Childress engines, and it has Hendrick engines. And with the gain of JTG Doherty this year, I think that's really helping them out. I mean, they've led a lot of laps in the past 3 weeks, or 3 races, I should say. I would say, actually, I'd argue last 4 races. Since Fort Worth, it seems like the team has been steadily,
picking it up
on the upward swing. Yes.
Yeah, because Johnson had the pole for Texas, I believe.
Led the first 60 so laps.
Yeah.
I just think the issue is that strategy-wise and call-wise, they just need to get it together. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, John. I think it's a culmination of things. I mean, and we're looking back a couple of years at this point, 2016, 2017, somewhere in there. I mean, you lose Gordon, you lose Junior, so you lose some big drivers. You lose Stewart-Haas, that's a big team, big customer. Crew chiefs come and go. You move Chad to the 24 to help William Byron. You get rid of Darian Grubb. You bring in Kevin Meendering. Chevy switches from the SS to the Camaro, which I think really the SS was, if we're talking the Gen 6 era, of all the different bodies that have come through that era, I think that I would argue that the SS was the best body to have, if we're talking from an aero standpoint. So from an aero standpoint, the Camaro was a deficiency. I think it's fair to say, from a technological standpoint or a mechanical standpoint, however you want to say it, I think Chevy has lacked there too. It's just a culmination of things in the Chevy camp and in the Hendrick camp. Ganassi, I think, has found something this year so far, and I think Hendrick has started to find something as well.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right about that. It's a slow process for the Chevrolet camp. The Camaro, the issue with the Camaro is that Chevy had announced they were going to use the Camaro, and then NASCAR kind of drugged their feet about the rules package 2017 for the 2017 season until the last minute, and Chevrolet had already designed their car based on the 2016 package. Well, once they cut that downforce out, then it was just, deficient from there. So it was bad timing on Chevrolet's part, not necessarily on Chevrolet's part. It was just bad timing all around.
Right. And from a leadership standpoint at Hendrick, I mean, people were worried about, what about Rick Hendrick when he's gone? They've got Jeff Gordon. They've got a system in place for when the time comes. So at Hendrick Motorsports, there's no need to worry about the future of Hendrick Motorsports. I'd be more worried about the future of Roush Fenway Racing, honestly. If we're going to transition into teams that are in trouble, I'd say Roush Fenway Racing is definitely a team. If you're looking at a team that's in trouble, Roush Fenway Racing is that team. Because at one point they were a 5-car team, had 5 cars in the chase, a 10-man chase in 2005. They had 5 guys in it, and had 3 guys with a chance at winning the championship going into the last race. Won 2 championships back to back, 03-04. Should have won it in 02 if not for a penalty against Mark Martin in that team.
And then 05.
In 05, they definitely could have won it with any of their 5 guys. So, I mean, they were, like, if we're talking as a whole, they were the team. I know Hendrick is a strong team with Johnson and Gordon, that combo that they had. But Roush as a whole was the team in the 2000s. And now, they're nowhere to be found. No star power as drivers. The equipment just isn't there. Even bringing in Matt Kenseth for those races that they did last year, I mean, they might have learned a little bit. It's just,
I'd argue it helped. It really did.
It did help. It did, yeah. But they need a lot more help than that, and I think it proved that there was a radio clip. I think it was on Radioactive, and it was spotter relaying information, just times, and I forget what time that the spotter said, but say it was like a 29.52 or something. Or he said, leader's running a 5.2, we're running a this or that. And basically they were a second off of the leader, and they were about to get lapped. This was like 30 laps into the race.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they have a problem. It's been a problem for years. I mean, they lost Greg Biffle due to, I would assume it was just funding.
Yes.
They didn't have the funding to have a third car. He was the veteran of the team. They had to let him go. Carl Edwards left because it was falling apart, and I think once Kenseth and Edwards were gone, it was the beginning of the end.
Well, it's the same thing that happened to Hendrick. They had such great talent with Edwards, with Kenseth on the team. David Reagan was kind of the weak link, but they had a strong team nonetheless. And I'm looking at the stats now. The last time they posted double-digit top 10s was Edwards, 2014. They have not eclipsed more than 9 top 10s in a season.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
It is. It really is. It's sad to see, but that's the cycle of a team. If you're not living, you're dying.
Well, I think they also, I don't think it's been talked about really, but do they have a succession uh, model in place for Jack Roush or John Henry? You know, do they have a successor? Is that team going to carry on? How are they going to carry on? You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of car owners in NASCAR right now that are getting up there in age.
Well, you got RP, which has one of the largest empires. You have, I'd say Chip's getting up there, but he's not as old as some of the others. Rick. You have Richard Childress. That's another one that's getting up there in age. It's just there's a lot of old owners and not a lot of people that can replace those guys per se.
Right. I would argue Penske, the successor would probably be Tim Cindric or Jay Penske for that matter. You'd have two pretty good successors there. For Childress, you'd have the Dillons. So I don't think you'd have anything to worry about there. Maybe from a competition standpoint, there might be an issue there. But I'd say RCR shouldn't have a problem with them being around. The Wood Brothers, as long as they're aligned with Penske, I don't see there being a problem with that. I guess the reason I'm scared for Roush is because look at the Wood Brothers, or not the Wood Brothers, but Robert Yates Racing. Okay, look how good of a team they were. How many good drivers they had drive for them. They were a 2-car operation through the 2000s. And then once they lost Mars, once they lost UPS and Mars, it just seemed like that was it. That was it right there. And then Robert Yates sold it off to Doug Yates. And just from there, it was a downhill spiral. It was just there's nothing they could do from there.
Well, on top of that, let's go back with that. So 2006, Doug Yates entered a partnership with the guys from Haas, the kart Haas. So you had Carl Haas, Michael Lanigan, and David Letterman positioned with the team. So financially, they were going to be fine. But then Robert's health deteriorated to nothing. So then he had to, back out of that partnership, and then Doug had to take over the team with minimal sponsorship, minimal this, minimal that. And it just went downhill from there. And then you had the downturn of the economy. So
right.
I don't know. Like a lot of events led to that team going under. It's kind of sad that they're gone, but they still have a successful engine shop now. With Roush and Roush Yates engines for Ford.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you think of the drivers that Robert Yates Racing had in the 2000s, you had Sadler and Dale Jarrett in the middle of the 2000s.
Yep.
David Gilliland wins a Busch race, and they sign him middle of 06.
Yeah, and they moved Sadler out mid-season after Watkins Glen, I believe it was.
Yeah, right around India, I remember, because that was the same point in time that Jeremy Mayfield opened his mouth about Ray Evernham and Aaron Crocker, and and then Sadler got the 19 car. But I guess my point is, you go from having Dale Jarrett's a champion, and then Elliott Sadler was a decent driver, for that time period. You go to having a rookie in a deteriorating program, David Gilliland, and then Dale Jarrett goes to Michael Waltrip Racing.
Yeah, poached by Toyota.
Then you have Ricky Rudd come in.
Yep.
Ricky Rudd was off for a season, didn't do too bad, had the Mars sponsorship. At the end of 07, Mars leaves. 08 comes around. You still got David Gilliland and Travis Kvapil. Probably, in my opinion, probably two of the most overhyped busts of the 2000s. I mean, I know you got Casey Atwood, which I would still contest he's not the biggest bust in NASCAR history, but according to everybody, he is. But you go from having a little bit of star power to having nothing, and then no funding either, because I think Gilliland was sponsored by FreeCreditReport.com or whatever, and then
the 28 had random sponsors throughout the season.
Yeah.
It was a mess.
I think that was the first big instance of what we saw of teams having to piece together sponsorships for the season, because it used to be you'd have a sponsor for the whole season, and maybe if it was like Gordon, you'd have DuPont and then Pepsi, or say for I think Tony Stewart had Powerade a couple times. There was, like it wasn't too often that you see a guy with a different sponsor on the hood of that car. So the fact that that kind of signified the change in the times. It was a new car. There's teams that started to struggle. The Wood Brothers at that point were a part-time team. Don't forget that. I think it was after 05. After 05, they went to a part-time operation, or maybe it was after 06. They went to a part-time operation, and they never ran the full season again until 2016 with Blaney.
Yeah, but that had a lot of Penske funding behind it.
Right. Yep. So that's crazy to think about. This weekend we've got the Grand Prix of Indianapolis.
Yep.
Or the IndyCar Grand Prix, whatever they call it, whatever they advertise it as. The Indy GP, and all the Road to Indy feeder series. I think each series runs a doubleheader there.
Mm-hmm.
We've got NASCAR at Kansas, so that should be pretty fun.
No.
Yeah, that was a little bit of sarcasm. I don't think that's gonna be very exciting to watch, but you never know.
It's Kansas.
Yeah, but back to the IndyCar side of things. Basically open up the month of May with the Indy GP. Kind of gets us hyped towards the Indianapolis 500. The Indy 500 has 36 entries for this year's race, with 7 previous winners and 7 rookies. And of course, the rookie class is fantastic. Marcus Ericsson, Santino Ferrucci, Ben Hanley, Colton Herta, Patricio Award, Felix Rosenquist, and technically Jordan King is still a rookie because he hasn't run a full schedule yet. So 7 rookies. The 7 previous winners are Castroneves, Dixon, Hunter-Reay, Kanaan, Power, Rossi, and Sato. 14. Wow, this is kind of crazy. 14 American drivers.
Jeez, I never realized there were that many Americans. We always complain there's not enough Americans in the field, but my goodness.
Yeah, we've got Andretti, Carpenter, Daly, Ferrucci, Herta, Hildebrand, Hunter-Reay, Karam, Kimball, Newgarden, Piggott, Rahal, Rossi, and Veach. Which, some star power.
Absolutely.
I hope Marco runs well just because that retro scheme that they got going on, that throwback to Mario, that looks so cool.
Is it bad for me to ask him to win the race so he can just retire?
Marco?
Yes.
Well, I think when he bought part of his car, I think that kind of sealed the deal that he's not going anywhere, considering he's now a partner of the 98 car.
Yeah, I don't want to read off that team name. That is so long.
It's what is it? Andretti Herta Autosport with Kerr, Agajanian, and Marco, I believe.
Marco Andretti. Yeah. It's so...
That is such a ridiculously long name. Like, that's just insane.
I mean, it's just as bad as, like, Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan race.
Yeah, that's not as bad, I guess, when you look at
it
the 98.
rolls off the tongue a lot better, I can say
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
But getting back to Indy, we have 36 entries. You know, what's your expectation going into the 500 this year?
So actually, I didn't notice this, but of the 36 engines that are being supplied, it's 18 and 18, perfect split between Honda and Chevy. So that's pretty interesting. So I noticed it was reported that they made some subtle aero changes.
I think they added a wicker.
Which I think that would improve the racing. The thing, when you look at last year's race, and people say it was a bad race last year. I was there. It was
TV coverage wise, it was not good.
Yeah, I was there, and I enjoyed it. Obviously, it wasn't as good as previous years. I'll admit it was probably one of the worst of the DW12 era. But if you look at 500s in general, it was pretty entertaining. You had a little bit of strategy in there. You had 30 lead changes. It wasn't the same guy that led the whole race. I had a couple wrecks that made the restarts exciting. Actually had some guys passing on the outside of the corners. I think Rossi made a couple outside passes. I think Wickens did it once or twice. So it was exciting from that standpoint. And it was an extremely hot day. It was like mid-90s. I think it was 95, 93, something like that. Which, I mean, we got rotisserie, being completely honest. I mean, it was hot. But when it's a hot day and it's a super speedway and IndyCar, the racing's not going to be as good. Remember 2013 when we had those, I don't know how many lead changes we had, but
80 plus?
Yeah, it was insane. It was record-breaking. Well, having that many lead changes, you look at the temperature, you can't tell me that didn't play a factor. That didn't play a big factor. Yeah. Oh, definitely. But I mean, if you're looking at the aero kit in general, and you look at the cool temperatures, that was a huge play in it. This year, I think passes will be up. I think lead changes will be up as long as it's not ridiculously hot like it was last year. I think a Chevy wins it again. I personally, I'm going to pick Newgarden. Not going to lie. I'm going to take Joseph Newgarden. I think it's his year. There hasn't been a 500 where he's really been a factor. I'd say 2016 he was partially a factor, but there hasn't been a race where he's been a factor at the finish. And I think the Penske's have been fast there. He's going to be a factor. I think the biggest question in the month of May is how's McLaren going to do? Because their installation lap, they blew up. They didn't even make it off. I don't think they made it off the access road.
No, well, they did. They didn't make it off the access road to begin the session, but they did make a couple of slow laps, and they were the slowest of slow.
Yeah, so that's a little scary if I'm being honest. I'd say if I had to pick the three that are not making it, I would say that Pippa Mann is not going to make the show. I think that's
universally probably agreed on.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty obvious that she's not going to make the field. I think it's fair to say James Davison, you got to worry about him. Not from a driver standpoint, but just the equipment standpoint. If we're looking at a rookie or a full-time competitor, Dragon Speed isn't a full-time team, but you got to worry about them definitely. Ben Hanley being his first oval, Dragon Speed, its first 500, being a new team, how far off the pace they were to start St. Petersburg. Never know, they may pick up the pace a little bit, but I think it's fair to say the 81 and the 39 are kind of lock-ins to not make Indy.
I'm kind of concerned about the 59 of Chilton. Even though he's done well in the race, Carlin-wise, I mean, that goes into the whole Fernando Alonso. They're kind of aligned
exactly.
with him. So I would be afraid of Carlin. Not necessarily Patricio. I think he'll do fine. Patricio will do fine. And same with Kimball. But Chilton and Fernando, on the fence. I think we might have a surprise like last year, somebody who misses it, like Hinchcliffe.
See, I would venture to say that if we're looking at a full-time competitor to miss the race, I would say probably Marcus Ericsson, because he's a rookie. It's his first speedway, first 500, and he's got what? He would have 5 IndyCar races under his belt by that point.
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to mention this team. I think Juncos?
Juncos.
Kyle
Kaiser, yeah.
Yeah, Kyle Kaiser. They're running the season. And they didn't even have the driver announced until 5 days ago.
Yeah. I think they're in trouble too.
Yeah. I think from a whole team perspective, they're in trouble. I mean, they entered IMSA this year with a Cadillac team. And not to say they're doing bad or anything, they're just taking on way too much, way too soon.
Yeah. I would say guarantees to miss it, Hanley and Pippa Mann. I'd say people you really got to worry about, Ericsson and Davison. I would say Kaiser, maybe Max Chilton, and I would say definitely Jordan King because it's a Rahal car. Rahal didn't they didn't qualify very good at the 500 last year.
Oh, but
And Jordan King has never ran an oval. I just realized that he's never run an oval.
Oh yeah, he hasn't. That is
Because remember, he was the road course driver for Ed Carpenter last year. He's never run an oval.
Yeah, it's because Ed can't get out of the car.
Yeah, that's another story for another time. But
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, John, I forgot to ask you, who do you got winning?
Who do I got winning? It's all over the place for me. Just looking at speed wise, I mean, we don't get an oval now before Indy,
Right.
so it's very difficult to say. Well, who has the advantage? I think that's one thing that the IndyCar schedule should be looking at in the future. Get an oval in early, like a Homestead, something like that, maybe in April.
Yeah, definitely.
But to say who's going to win, I don't think it's going to be Penske this year. I just have a strong feeling it's not going to be Penske. It's probably going to be a Honda of some type. I'd really like to see Bourdais win it, personally.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
I know Dale Coyne is great with strategy. They're always great with strategies. Overall speed, they had it in 2017.
Yeah.
Before Bourdais, broke a hip.
They even had that with Davison in the race. Davison was up there leading and got crashed out by Serbia, and that caused a big wreck. And then they had Ed Jones finish on the podium for them.
Yeah, and he should have won Rookie of the Year, but that's, again, another story for another time. But if we're completely honest, I believe when Davison did run for Bourdais, he was running in a road course chassis and running up front and leading laps. So if Dale Coyne had, I don't know, half the budget of some of these big teams, we would be complaining about them winning every single week instead of your Penske's or your Andretti's. But I'm going to go with Bourdais. I have a good feeling about them this year.
I will say that's kind of going out on a limb, but that would be really cool to see, just because that would legitimize Bourdais as one of the all-time greats, because he won the 4 championships in Champ Car with Newman Haas, and people say, well, he was with the best team in the series, and they had no competition, and this and that, and everything else. They were still the best team when there was Penske, Ganassi, and what was Team Green, which is now Andretti Autosport. They were competing with those guys, and some of the teams they had to compete against back then were still pretty decent teams, just not teams that anybody knows of, because most of those teams got shafted in the merger because they didn't have the money to do it. But my main point is Sebastian Bourdais is a very underrated champion. And it's crazy that we're saying that he's an underrated driver. He is an underrated driver. He may not be in his prime right now. He may not be able to go out and win the pole half the time, that back how it was in the Champ Car days. But Sebastian Bourdais is a really underappreciated driver, I would say, because since he's come back to IndyCar after his stint in F1, he has not had a top-tier ride, which is crazy to think of. He has not had a top-tier ride, and he's still won races. He got a podium with Dragon Racing, a team that's no longer around. He won races for KV, they're no longer around, and he's won races for Dale Coyne. So I think what he's accomplished on top of his championships, what he's done with Newman Haas, I think he deserves a 500.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And think about this: he's won at least a race every year since 2014.
Yes.
So I don't know, and we got to also consider he's doing other types of racing. I mean, look at him at the Ford
He ran
GT.
IMSA.
Yeah, he's been running IMSA for Joey Han, who's been sick and such like that. He's really good at sports car racing. He's a really good all-around driver, yet we consider him, he's kind of underrated. But he's not. I don't know why we don't consider him at the same level as a Dixon or as an Andretti or such like that.
Remember that maneuver that he put on Dixon at Long Beach last year?
Even though it was the right call, it was a crap penalty.
Yes. I think he had his right sides on the line, on the pit exit line.
Mm-hmm.
But that was so cool that it was almost like, how can you penalize a guy for that? Just because he outbraked him out on the outside and somehow didn't crash.
Yeah, he outbraked him, locked up the rear tires, slid underneath of him, and did the over-under on him.
Yeah.
All in the same corner. It's just, the guy, again, massive
He did it
talent.
twice, too. He didn't just do it once. He did it twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, he very underrated. And it's unfortunate. I know he's probably loyal to Dale Coyne at this point just because they've given him a semi-competitive car. But
and now you have the backing of Sullivan and Jimmy Vasser as well.
Correct. Basically, all the pieces from KV minus Kevin Kalkoven.
Exactly.
Now, I think it's also worth pointing out, Bourdais at Mid-Ohio last year, he started dead last in the race.
Yeah.
You know where he finished?
Not for certain.
6th.
P6?
Yes. And I don't think they had any yellows in that race.
No, Mid-Ohio usually has no yellows whatsoever.
Right. They had no crashes. I know that. They had no crashes.
No yellows at all in that race either.
Yeah. Bourdais drove from 24th on the grid, dead last, and finished 6th.
Yeah.
Within
a 90-lap race.
He was within a half second of passing Scott Dixon for 5th place. And you look at the people that are ahead of him: Rossi, Wickens, Power, Newgarden, Dixon. 4 of those 5 guys are Big 3 teams.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I've got nothing else to say about it because it kind of speaks for itself. Sebastian Bourdais is one of the greatest of all time. Though he won't be recognized as one, it's hard to say otherwise.
Because he's an arrogant driver and he did it in the Champ Car days. That's the only 2 reasons.
Right. If he would have done that, if he would have entered in 1999, and granted he wouldn't have won as much, but if he would have come in 1999, 2000 and done stuff like that, and then go over to the IRL like everybody else and stick around there until, they got their stuff together, then yeah, we'd be talking about him as definitely one of the all-time greats.
If the whole first bankruptcy of CART went through in 2003 and the merger happened then, who would, it would have been crazy to see what, the CART teams would have done at that time.
Because I think it would have been a lot easier for them at that point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They still had the money, and they also, and it probably would have, Panos would have had a little bit more say than the IR05. That shitbox.
Well, I think you also would have been able to keep Lola. You would have been able to keep. You would have had the chance at keeping Ford Cosworth. Being that early into the IRL's era, you would have been able to argue, hey, why not? It would stir up the discussion. Hey, why not bring back turbocharged engines
back to the speedway? It was less than 10 years at that point.
Yeah, exactly. The split was less prominent. The damage was done at that point, but 2003 versus 2008, that's less time. I think it would have been easier to accomplish something like that.
Absolutely.
This was also at a point where the IRL was still all ovals. Can't forget, they were still all ovals, which I think when they first started running road courses and street courses, I think that's when we first started seeing that they were open to, merging as one series again, becoming a true IndyCar series. But that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of the Pit Limiter podcast. John, it's been fun, brother. Thanks for joining me again.
Absolutely, anytime.
So tell us where we can find you on social media.
Well, you can find me at JSPoolIII on Twitter. Also, check out my gaming page, JP3 Gaming on YouTube, and JP3 Gaming 56. I do some on Twitch. I do some broadcast of some IndyCar races, I believe, that you host, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. Our iRacing League, it's a lot of fun sometimes. We actually got our Indy 500 coming up. this month.
Q on Wednesday.
Yes, sir. It's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you guys follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ZBuchanan4. Make sure you guys like my Facebook page at Zach Buchanan Racing. I post a lot about my karting stuff on there. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I post karting videos on there as well. It's just Zach Buchanan. Make sure you guys check us out on any of the podcast apps. We're on all major podcast platforms, whether it's Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all major platforms, we're on there. We're also on Facebook. Check us out at The Pit Limiter Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at The Pit Limiter. Check out our YouTube channel. We also upload episodes there as well. It's been fun, guys. Catch us next week. Next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Pit Limiter Podcast. Goodbye, everybody.